So why trauma-informed primary care? First of all, we know it lays the foundation for successfully implementing screening for ACEs and toxic stress. When staff understand the prevalence and impact of childhood adversity and toxic stress and the urgent need to address it, they are more ready to take on this type of initiative and ensure that they are doing screening in a compassionate, person-centered way. Trauma-informed primary care is also good patient-centered care that can improve the health and well-being of our patients and their families. It improves clinical decision-making by incorporating knowledge of the health impacts of toxic stress and trauma into our responses and treatment planning, and it supports the building of collaborative care networks focused on prevention, integration of behavioral health, case management, and care coordination services. Finally, it creates environments in which providers and staff experience compassion, resilience, so they can stay healthy and do this fulfilling and challenging work. Before diving into the trauma-informed approach, I want to talk a little more about stress. So for many of you, this will be a review, but it can help us all get on the same page. So our stress response falls along a spectrum of 3 different types of stress response, of which toxic stress is one. The first type of stress on this continuum is positive stress, which is a brief activation of the stress response, brief elevations in heart rates, blood pressure, and hormonal levels. Through the buffering effect of a caring relationship and other interventions, we can bounce back and recover from positive stress. An example of positive stress for a child is a test, first day of school, a big speech. This is all healthy stress and it builds resilience, and we don't need to be afraid of it. Tolerable stress is a time-limited stress response that results in a short-term activation of stress response. Examples of this could include a big move or the death of a grandparent for a child. Toxic stress, the type of stress that we need to be most concerned about, is the constant activation of the stress response in the absence of caring, stable relationships, especially during sensitive periods of early development. It can be toxic to brain architecture and other developing organ systems, resulting in long-term changes in the brain and body. Thus, of course, it is very important that we help our patients and families manage their levels of stress, and that as staff and leaders, we do the same. So there's much we can do about stress. That's the good news. Regulation is one set of strategies that can help us mitigate toxic stress and move to a calmer state when we are agitated, frustrated, anxious, or upset. Regulation helps us to quiet our lower brain, where the complex networks of the stress response system are located. It's really critical that we practice regulation and teach and model it for our staff and patients right now. So there are many ways we can self-regulate or quiet down our lower brain. We can use our cortex or thinking brain with strategies such as mindfulness, journaling, and gratitude practices. We can also use somatosensory strategies to regulate, or those strategies that involve our body and senses, such as focused breathing, taking a walk, or listening to music. These are really important, especially now, because thinking brain regulation strategies are not always available to us if we are experiencing unpredictable and extreme stress. So really right now we need to regulate all day. Our past practices that perhaps made us feel well may not be enough right now. So we need to try to build in activities such as taking a break every hour to do some focused breathing, taking a brief walk, maybe 2 to 3 minutes whenever we can throughout the day. And the third way we regulate is through relationships. So we know that emotions are contagious. A calm friend or adult can help our emotions decrease in intensity and allow us to move towards a state of calm. The good news is that this type of connection doesn't need to involve a long, involved conversation. So one simple text, such as, "Hope your day's going well, thinking of you," can help us feel more regulated. We can bring regulation practices into the organization and create environments in which it is expected that staff will practice these strategies throughout the day. And here are 6 stress busting strategies for stress regulations from ACEs Aware that are also incredibly important to share with our patients and to use for ourselves. So first, supportive relationships, again, that connection in which we include our caregivers, other family members, and peers to help us stay in a state of health. Regular physical activity, high quality sufficient speech, balanced nutrition, mental health care, including psychotherapy or psychiatric care, and substance use disorder treatment when indicated. And of course, mindfulness and meditation practices. So we can't talk about toxic stress and ACEs without talking about resilience. Resilience is the ability to withstand or recover from stressors, and it results from a combination of both intrinsic and extrinsic factors like safe, stable, and nurturing relationships with family members and others, as well as predisposing biological susceptibility. It's really important to note that with our advances in science, in the understanding of the impact of stress on neuroendocrine, immune, and genetic regulatory health, we must consider resilience within that context also. In a resilient organization, we work to create both individual and organizational resilience. For the individual, that means we create environments and relationships in which staff can achieve compassion resilience, or the ability to maintain our physical, emotional, and mental well-being while responding compassionately to people who are suffering. We know that the demands and pressures of working in primary health care can affect our ability to remain compassionate, and it is the responsibility of both the individual and the organization to understand the influences that drive burnout and compassion fatigue and to respond appropriately. So organizations can also experience trauma and adversity, and we have seen the impact of this year's events on our organizations. Primary care clinics have been impacted by changing workflows, by learning new billing, coding, and documentation practices, and implementing platforms for telemedicine, all while trying to support staff who are experiencing their own increased stress and fear of exposure to COVID. So as a resilient organization, we strive to strengthen the ability for the organization to anticipate, prepare for, respond to, and adapt to incremental change and sudden disruptions. The essence of being resilient as an organization means that you can fail well and recover and take key learnings to strengthen future work. A resilient organization includes leaders and staff who have language and skills to have difficult conversations, to offer feedback, to hold each other accountable, and to create trust. Trauma-informed approaches builds both individual and organizational resilience. So what is this approach? Well, it is an organizational intervention that recognizes and responds to signs and symptoms and risks of trauma to better support the health needs of patients who have experienced ACEs and toxic stress. It creates safe environments for patients and staff that promote healing and recovery by always prioritizing people's dignity, voice, and self-empowerment. So here are the components of this framework. First, we understand the prevalence of trauma and adversity and their impacts on health and behavior. We recognize the effects of trauma and adversity on health and behavior. We train all staff on trauma-informed care best practices, and this means everyone from the chief medical officer to everyone who provides direct service to the people who partner with us to keep our buildings clean. We integrate knowledge about trauma and adversity into all of our policies, practices, and procedures and treatment planning. And always, we resist re-traumatization by approaching patients and staff with non-judgmental support. So what is it that we need to know in order to make this profound shift in our service delivery? So first, we need to embrace 2 important tenets of a trauma-informed approach. I think this first one you are probably familiar with. We change the question from what is wrong with you to what happened to you. This paradigm shift requires us to honor strengths in an individual, and we always move away from believing someone is broken or weak. We embrace the belief that an individual's health is impacted by the events in their lives, and healing and recovery is absolutely possible. Secondly, we assume everyone is doing the best they can. This is important in our work with patients and staff, but maybe most impactful in our work with staff. It doesn't mean we don't hold ourselves and others accountable. It means that as we strive for excellence, we bring grace, compassion, and empathy into the workplace.